Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Krashy, and today I wanted to do a little bit of theory crafting and a small discussion talking about defenders. Now, I actually don't have a ton of conclusive ideas, so this is kind of like a really in the moment thing. I want to sit here, I want to go over some things and talk about some ideas that I have. So by and large, I feel like the defender role as a whole, the actual whole classification of the role, is pretty underperforming, maybe the most underperforming role in the game. And so I made some little graphics, took some of their stats, or took their stat charts off of U9DB. So big shout out to U9DB for providing this info. And yeah, we're going to be taking a look at some of these characters. And then I have, well, that was a spoiler, but I have BLISSEY in the list as well. So it's alphabetical. BLISSEY in the list as well, because we're going to talk about her a little bit. So yeah, we have all of the defenders and their stats, and we're going to kind of look over them really quickly and talk about them. So let's go ahead and start with BLASTOISE. Now, I think, like I said, the issue with defenders is that I personally feel like they're just not tanky enough. I think that they don't fill enough of a role as a frontline tanker, like a frontline tank, to be tanky, to absorb damage, to warrant even picking them a lot of the time. In the current competitive meta, we've historically seen, you know, Mr. Mime as a tank, we've seen Wigglytuff as a tank, we've seen BLISSEY played as a tank, and in the early days we had some SNORLAX, but really SLOWBRO, you know, is hanging in there. But honestly, we just don't see a lot of the defender role. So what's going on with their stats? Well, let's look at them. The full stat chart is not really relevant, but you can look at it if you want, and I'm not going to talk about the scaling of it, like how they should start characters off or whatever, but let's look at the full stats of some of these defenders. So let's start with BLASTOISE. BLASTOISE ends at level 15 at 9800 HP. The attack is irrelevant. It has just shy of 600 defense and 412 SP defense. So, you know, these are big numbers. They're tanky numbers. Problem is, I actually feel like they're not tanky enough as a whole, and this is where it gets a little funny. And you have to keep in mind, I'm just talking about the tankiness alone. As a whole, in general, across the defender board, I think that I want these numbers to go up. That's where I would start. Keep in mind, this is not a one-size-fits-all solution, so it would require some changes. I think if you buff BLASTOISE, and this is kind of my opinion overall, and we can talk about it, I think if you buff the HP defense and SP defense of every single defender by about 20 to 25%, it would be a massive change to the game. The problem is that if you say that as a blanket statement, you're going to run into issues, right? Like if you just make that change, you're going to run into issues. So I think that the balancing of defenders is a little bit more requiring a little bit more attention than that, because Rapid Spin BLASTOISE would probably be broken again if it was super tanky and was able to do some damage. So I think that what you have to do is create a fair trade-off. Like, you don't want these characters to do no damage, but you probably would have to either individually nerf them or make it a trade-off where you increase their stats. Like, say we come down here and we increase their stats by, you know, 25% on HP defense and SP defense. I said 412, it's 420 SP defense. So 599 defense and 420 SP defense. If we increase these values by 25%, which is a lot, we would probably have to scale back their SP attack, or maybe even just scale back the individual characters' damaging abilities by some percentage, right? Either way, however you want to look at it. So it's an interesting thing to think about, because you don't want the defenders to be useless on the damage front, but you don't want them to be useless on the tanky front even more so. And I think that that's kind of what we're starting to see. So let's take a look at, and I'm going to skip BLISSEY for a little bit. Take a look at Crustle, 9900 defense, 580 SP defense, 400. So really comparable, 580, you know, very comparable stats. Greedent, 99 defense 433, SP defense 360. So he's actually, you know, a little on the less tanky end, and this makes sense for Greedent. And just for the sake of saying, I don't really have an issue with Greedent. I think that, you know, when talking about this discussion, it kind of becomes an all-encompassing defender thing. But let me know your thoughts about Greedent in the comment section down below, because I do think that while I'm talking about the entire class, it's not really a one-size-fits-all solution. I don't really know if I think Greedent needs to get changed at all. Maybe they can make him a little bit more tanky, just for a little bit of a buff to the character itself, but I'm not sure that's necessary, and I'm not sure that they should do that. So definitely one of the ones up in the air. 9648 HP, defense 510, and SP defense 379. So 379 SP defense is like, you know, a little bit lower compared to some of the others. It's got a little bit less HP than some of the others, and then 510 versus 580 and 599. So MAMOSWINE noticeably a little bit weaker, and maybe because they intend this character to be a bit more offensive, but honestly this character very much so, just based on the kit design, fits into that like hard tank position. I think a character like MAMOSWINE, someone that's not doing a ton of damage, would be a perfect recipient of cleanly taking these stats, the HP, the defense, and the SP defense, and buffing it by 25%. Or you could even try to standardize these stats across the board. I think that that's a little bit risky, like just making them flat values for level 15 for every single character, and then you could change the individual level scaling. That could be a bit of a slippery slope to do something like that, but I personally do think that MAMOSWINE would be a perfect recipient of just taking their stats and buffing them up. Let's look at SLOWBRO. SLOWBRO been holding pretty strong in the meta. I think it's mostly just the kit, and now we have SCALDBRO, but put SCALDBRO aside for a second. Let's talk about SURFBRO. We have 9400 HP, 421 defense, and 360 SP defense. The reality is that SCALDBRO probably needs to get, I said let's put it to the side, but I realized I do need to talk about it. SCALDBRO probably needs to get nerfed on the damage front a little bit anyways, so they either need to nerf or scale down the SP attack if you're going to make any kind of changes to SLOWBRO to make it tankier. But same thing, even this character I think could take a small buff. This one would not take that standard 25% tankiness across the board, because this character is actually performing decently well and has consistently performed pretty well, at least in recent days, as an actual defender with Surf, you know, playing tanky items and things like that. So maybe not the character that I would probably throw on the list for receiving a full 25% stat buff on some of the tanky front, but it could be a character that I wouldn't mind seeing them scale down the damage a little bit and, you know, increase the tankiness a little bit. Or keeping the character the way that it is and just seeing if that could fill a niche, right? Because some characters, not every single defender needs to be the tankiest defender with no damage. Maybe this could be one of the defenders that is a little bit damage oriented, potentially. Well, who knows? SNORLAX. What happened? You know, what happened to SNORLAX? Well, the reality is that I think that, first of all, this character, while, and I'm not really talking about offsets and buffing abilities, that would have to be a whole different video. I could talk about FlailLax, I really could, but it's really just its own thing. But let's just talk about the tankiness of the character. So, you know, heavy slam block, that's really the tanky kit that this character brings to the table. 9899 HP, that's great. Defense 580 and SP defense 440. You know, these stats are pretty big. You know, if we compare it, you know, 599, 9800, and then 420, you know, you compare that to SNORLAX 9899, 580, 440. Like, this character is tanky, but it's just not tanky enough in the current meta. With the buddy barrier changes, tanks basically kind of got power crept. They got a little bit power crept, and I don't think that the buddy barrier changes were bad. I don't think that the score shield changes were bad, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't adjust things to kind of bring things back in line with the intended goal of these classes or of these characters. So SNORLAX, I think, would another just like MAMOSWINE, would be another recipient perfectly to just take 25% increase. You know, 25% is a big one. I'm just kind of using that as a baseline. 25% increased stats to the tankiness, and that could honestly be at every level just to keep the scaling the same, or you could even build it in big spikes, right? Like, you could trickle in some of these stat changes in some of these levels so it hits like bigger spikes. I'm not going to pretend like I know the best idea, but the end goal that we're looking at really is just like, let's just look at the character and talk about how strong it could be. I do think that for some of these Pokemon, because I've been meaning to bring this up, I just forgot about it. I do think that some of these Pokemon don't necessarily need to be that much tankier and could, you know, be benefiting from maybe like a little bit more CDR, or like I said, being a bit more on the damage front. SNORLAX not being really one of those that I would offer that to. Like, SLOWBRO can actually do some damage. I think I would be kind of okay with that, and we could leave it a little bit less tanky. But someone like SNORLAX, I always see this as like the tank of the game, right? Like it used to be. And getting just like a big stat boost to really just stand and deliver, like to make it a force to be reckoned with as a tank, and not someone that just runs around doing crazy damage because it survives forever, would be a really cool thing to see. All right, Trevenant. This is another character that I just don't quite think you can buff too much. But what you could do is you could kind of turn its strength a little bit. You can tilt the strength a little bit. So you could either leave this character the way that it is, or you could make it slightly more tanky, right? We could take some of these stats, maybe increase his defense stats and his HP by 10%, and then you can bring the lifesteal value down a little bit. So it's not like, so you're just slightly turning it, or again, maybe when you do these changes, Trevenant still feels fine. I'm not really sure with Trevenant, but you're starting to see the overall theme that I'm going for. I do think that defenders in general need to be tanky, and this is really going to lead me to probably the part of the discussion that I'm most excited about, which is talking about supports as tanks. Like I said, historically speaking, we have had Mr. Mime in the meta as a tank. We have had BLISSEY in the meta as a tank. Currently have BLISSEY as probably the #1 tank in the game, and we have had Wigglytuff as a tank. Why is that? Well, let's take a little comparison. 10,000 HP, 200 defense, 300 SP defense. So, relatively speaking, the SP defense and the defense are much lower. This is a 400 defense gap. SP defense of 420 to 300. That's a 120 defense gap, and we're just looking at Blastoise because he's the closest one. But I'm pretty sure there's maybe a bigger gap between somebody else. But the health value, 10,000 HP. 10,000. Wait. You mean to tell me that BLISSEY has the most effective HP, or like, you know, the not effective HP, but the most flat amount of HP? So tankiness wise, the actual feeling of tankiness, how much mitigation is there in defense and SP defense? It's probably not the most tanky feeling mon because the defense and SP defense values are lower, but with 10,000 HP, it's effectively tanky enough to get the job done, and that is where we run into problems. So with the efficacy of BLISSEY's kit, how strong Soft Boiled and Safeguard is, how strong Egg Bomb is, how strong the Unite move is, the fact that you get Unite move at level 8, this character is essentially filling a role that is just better than the actual tanks of the game in that role, because it brings so much to the table. So what's the problem there? Well, first and foremost, I think that the problem is that this character is overtuned. I think that you know, Safeguard's really, really strong. I think Soft Boil is really, really strong. I think the Unite move probably does a little bit too much damage for support, although I do like the knock up and the damage style of it. I enjoy what it does, but I think it's maybe a little bit overtuned. So the character itself is a little bit overtuned, but looking at the stats, I just don't think that this character should be able to stand in a position that a defender is supposed to stand in. So what do you do? Well, it's clear that the efficacy of the defense and SP defense stats are not super crazy important when it comes to tankiness. So I don't exactly know what kind of equation goes on there, or what kind of level of mitigation these stats actually bring. But it can't be that crazy because the character is still tanky enough, or can survive in that environment as a defender role player, or like as like a tank player. But the health, right? I think that the implication of looking at this chart, comparing how it feels in game to that of a defender, is that 10,000 health is just simply way too strong. So really quickly on my side monitor, I should have probably done this for the video. I'm going to pull up Eldegoss's stats. Eldegoss has 8,000 health. Eldegoss has 200 defense and 140 SP defense, 8,000 health. Okay, let's pull up Lucario. And again, I should have probably done this for the video. Lucario has 7249 health. Why do supporters have more health than all-rounders, and in some cases, the defenders, in BLISSEY's case? I just don't think that that sits right with me. I think that at maximum, the flat health that a supporter should get is even to maybe an all-rounder. And that's if it's like a tanky supporter, right? Like if it's kind of filling like a niche in the archetype, maybe I could see that. But I genuinely think that supporters should have somewhere in the range of 6,500 to 7,000 health maximum. This would alter what the supporter role is meant to do. This would turn BLISSEY into a supporter because it would not be able to stand in place of a defender, and at the same time buffing the defender role and buffing the defender tankiness, the stats that they get, would make them a force to be reckoned with, assuming that we could reasonably nerf their damage to the point where defenders don't take over the meta, right? We don't want a defender tank meta where you're putting Blastoise in top lane for Rapid Spin, you're putting SNORLAX in bottom lane, and then you're jungling Trevenant, right? Like, we don't want that. So it definitely comes with a balancing act. But friends, that's my discussion for today. That's what I'm feeling. I want to see these characters niche into their roles, and it takes a little bit of TLC for each individual character. For BLISSEY, honestly, this is what I would do if I was the developers right now. I would nerf the damage of BLISSEY's Unite move, and I would drop BLISSEY's health to 7,000, maybe 6,500, and then BLISSEY is now a support. Does she get played a lot in the competitive meta? I don't know if you make that change. But I do know that she's currently taking over the role of a defender, rightfully so, because the defenders need love, and I would buff those defenders. So friends, thank you so much for watching. I definitely do appreciate it. These theory crafty fun videos are really fun for me. I enjoy them, but I want to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Drop a like on the video for me, drop a comment, give me that beautiful, juicy algorithm engagement. I would definitely appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As always, be sure to be kind to one another. Tell someone you love them, and I'll see you on the next video.